Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Discourse. I am your host, Brandon Sutton. And if you were looking for Benjamin Dixon tonight, he is not here for two reasons. One, it is his birthday, so be sure to wish him a happy birthday on Twitter. And two, he is sick, or at least he's pretending to be sick. I don't know. That's none of my business, really. So, I'm to fill in for him. And what I have planned for you tonight, well, what I have planned tonight is two things. The first is to flirt with pretty people over text message. And the second is to have a conversation on the Paris Agreement, a long overdue conversation on the Paris Agreement, Trump pulling out, the responses, all those lovely things. To help me with the latter, because I need no help with the former, is a lovely panel. I've been sexting since before you were born. I invented sexting.
You're a year older than me. Shut up.
Yeah. Anyway.
Prodigy.
My point remains. To help the prodigy, yeah. One half of Mob Deep. To help me with the latter goal is a lovely panel of powerful progressive pundits. As always, I need to find a new opening. Starting off, my producer, Richard. Say hello, Richard.
Hey everyone, we're trying some new settings back here, and so if we're getting some stuttering and stuff, I apologize, but I will be trying to clean that up throughout the broadcast. Always be able to go back and watch on the DVR, and it should be at least a little bit cleaner there, so apologize, but got great content, so we'll focus on that.
I gotta bring attention to my speech impediment, man.
No stuttering. No, the only speech impediment allowed on this show is my lisp because it's cute. Speaking of impediments to content, joining me as always is my Socratic life partner, Adair. Say hello.
Wow. At least, it's fine. I'm the cute one out of the two of us. You need to have something, but it's all right. Thanks for joining us, folks. As much as I love you all, this takes second place to the game core of the Stanley Cup Finals. Let's go, Pens.
And our white ally, John McDonald. Say hello, John.
Hey guys, what's going on? Thank you again for having me.
John McDonald or Old McDonald?
Oh, well, that does apply considering I'm a decade older than you.
Well, do you have a farm? Because if you have a farm, I want to go pet the chickens. Well, then fuck you. No one cares.
I know you want to do.
No one cares.
Okay. Getting started. Initially, I had planned to spend the entire first hour, really however long it took, to break down the Paris Climate Agreement and Trump pulling out of it and what that means. But prior to us going on, right before we went on, an important article involving Russian tampering with the United States election came out from The Intercept, and I feel as though it would be at least mild malpractice to not address that before we move into older news, although still important news. So, John, tell us what The Intercept found.
Okay, so The Intercept found a document from an NSA contractor that was directly from the NSA that showed that, and again, this is the NSA documents making this accusation with no technical data to back it up, that Russia or the GRU was using a campaign of hacks and a multi-step process to get to local election officials and get to systems that oversee voter rolls. Now, what that means is basically they were using something called spear phishing to get information about a certain company. They name the company, or they don't name the company in the document, but they guess the company in the article. And then they use that information that they gathered from that one company to then send the local officials emails that were, again, a second part of a spear phishing campaign to get access to their machines by putting on a Word document that had a shell script for Word. In the background, possibly set up a beacon or possibly set another malware package to be downloaded.
Okay, so what does that mean? I know what that means, but what does that mean in terms of Russia's role in hacking the election? Like, is it definitive that they did it? I mean, I'm speaking rhetorically, but I want you to get to the meat and details of this particular article. What does the article prove?
So far, the article proves that a spear phishing campaign went on to get to local electors. That's it. They found some shell data, a shell script, or at least the NSA says they found a shell script and a Word document that allows them to set up something that allows for the local machines that are affected to have remote control. Now, does that, and the NSA even goes further into the article saying that they don't know whether or not it affected the election. They don't have any evidence that it did. They don't have anything. All they have is they have this spear phishing campaign. So, and again, like I said at the very beginning, nothing in the NSA document or even the article substantiates the claim that it was Russia that did this. And multiple people inside, even in the article, were quoted as saying this is not a very sophisticated campaign, which means it doesn't necessarily have to be a nation state. This could be anyone. And I pointed you to this earlier, Brandon. There was a guy, and there's an article in Bloomberg called How to Hack an Election. There was a guy from South America who did this this same exact thing in multiple elections across South and Central America. Now, why it was different there versus us, we do not have a centralized voting system. All of our machines are now are remote, locally controlled, and most of them are not equipped with any type of either Bluetooth or internet capabilities. So they did not get to the voting machines. What did happen, though, is that they were allowed to get to possibly the second-party software that is allowing vote registration access for people working at polls. So what this means is if a poll has someone come in, present ID, they look up on this second-party software and say, oh, this person is registered in this county as a Democrat, blah, 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 and then they're given a form to go vote, put it in the machine, and then that's tabulated.
Okay, so no hacking voter machines. This is not that. This is not them individually hacking voter machines. This is not them tampering with the digital records of voting after the election. Nope. This is the assessment of raw data that we do not see, right? Because the raw data is not included in this package that they got. That someone, maybe the Russians, was involved with an organized spear phishing campaign in the months leading up to the 2016 election, as per this May 5th document, right?
Yes, and what's interesting is that they call it a campaign, but as far as I could tell, there was 122 individuals that were contacted, as well as 7 companies, I think it was. So that doesn't speak to me of a very large campaign. Any one of us could have spent a month gathering that list and done the same thing.
Okay, so I mean, I think that this is the kind of information that is good to have out. Journalistically speaking, it's important that we get that this came to light. Me personally, and again, I've always been not necessarily skeptic about the Russia thing, although I guess, skeptic is the right word. For me, this doesn't really change anything because we're still lacking that hard data. We're still lacking that, raw data. We're still lacking multiple sources confirming yes or no definitively. However, I think with the article itself, the way it's framed, the way it's written, the headlines, it can really feed into either narrative that it did or did not happen. That you're going to have 50% of people saying, well, this is defend the proof that Russia hacked the voting machines and changed the election outcomes, even though it explicitly states that that's not what occurred. But, for the unsophisticated thinker, it's like, oh, voting rolls, I see voting, I see cyber attack, I see X, Y, and Z. Okay. And then, for the, I guess, other side of that, the other side of that coin is people saying this definitively proves that there was no collusion between Russia and Trump. And it also doesn't do that either.
No. And in fact, it actually, I'm going to play devil's advocate. I am a huge skeptic that it was Russia that did this. Now, I'm also a huge skeptic that it was Russia that hacked the DNC. But what I do think that this does is it actually puts more pressure on the campaign to find out whether or not there was collusion, explicitly because this type of hack would be useless without a secondary data set that shows who likely voters are. And so, both the DNC and the GOP, that's what their data portions of their party and the data portions of their campaign do, is build likely voter data sets. So without one of those data sets to say, okay, who voted where, this information is virtually useless except to kick random people off of the ability to vote. Because it doesn't, the type of information that would be available on those machines doesn't necessarily give you enough to make a judgment on whether or not they would vote for Clinton or vote for Trump. So it does put pressure more on trying to find out whether or not there was collusion. But I also think that I've been saying this for a while, our whole voting system is electronically very, very screwed up and is not secure and is also non-verifiable.
Well, Definitely. And I mean, we obviously have a lot of issues with our election integrity, and the Republicans are not helping that as they dissolve even more, agencies designed to protect election integrity. That's all fine. I mean, again, I want more hard data. I want more hard evidence. And I know
Yeah, there's none here.
the people who are hearing this are going to go, but I thought last time you were on, you talked about how Russia didn't do anything and how, the X, Y, and Z wasn't the case. And it's like, then if you thought I said that you're wrong, you should feel bad for your listening comprehension skills.
I said that.
I mean, yeah, he said that, but also what I said was, A, I want some hard evidence, and B, even if Russia did do something, but for direct collusion with Trump, it's not going to get him impeached, and it's not going to help Democrats win. So it's kind of not necessarily a good electoral strategy. It's like it's not expedient. Yes. It might weaken him in some ways, if it's proven. But again, it's not proven. The last part of this intercept story before we move into what I was actually prepared to talk about tonight is
I'm frozen. I can't do anything.
Can you mute yourself?
I can't. I'm frozen.
Sorry.
I literally can't do anything.
So he started panically clacking against the key.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that was great.
Sorry for the background noise. Final point is, as many of you probably heard. Yeah. Technological incompetence is appropriate for the story. As many of you have heard, the person who is accused of leaking this information has now been arrested or charged by the FBI. So, in what some are calling malpractice on the part of the Intercept, in attempting to verify or receive commentary on these leaks, they sent a copy of a hard copy that was mailed to them by Miss Winter.
Photos of it.
Photos of it. It's in photos of it of hard copies that were mailed to them by Winter allegedly, and based on those photos, they were able to determine who exactly it was who did this. Because Miss Winter, not that she was any, OPSEC expert, left a huge trail of breadcrumbs. So
she was one of 6 people that printed this document out, and then on top of that, she was also, which they I guess one of the things that it was in the document said because of a crease, they determined that it was folded, which meant that it was a hard copy that she carried out. They found out she was one of 6, and then they went into her workstation and found out she'd been communicating with the Intercept. Now, whether that was communicating with the Intercept on her Gmail account from her own workstation or communicating with the Intercept from her work email address, that to me is the part that speaks of incompetence on the Intercept's part.
Yeah, I mean, if the Intercept is actually, guilty or not guilty is the wrong word, but if they did in fact send high-ranking officials photocopies of hard copies, that speaks to a level of sloppiness that I don't expect from the Intercept. I mean, I would expect them to know better how to protect their sources, but it's what it is. Anyone else want to comment on this story? Because there's just not really that much here. I know, again, people are going to say, oh my God, but 17 individual agencies confirmed. No, they didn't. They didn't.
4
did. If you think it was 17, it's because you've been lied to. And Clapper came out and literally said that it was not 17. So I don't know what to tell you.
And to which degree any of them were confirming what is another story. It takes even more detail. As far as the story itself, go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish it.
To the story itself, I think, I did read. I feel like I read or heard that she was actually working from home. Did anybody else hear that, or is that
no?
Okay, but she was at some sort of facility, is what you were under the understanding of?
That was my understanding from reading the FBI document.
All right. Yeah, as this was breaking, I that might have been just from a tweet that I saw, or it might have been over the CNN or MSNBC over the TV that I just kind of only half heard or something. So I wanted to hear if anybody had any clarification on that. Otherwise, there was a large trail of breadcrumbs that I think could have been avoided but also I think it's interesting to see where this is going to put people regarding their position on leaks and leakers, as far as punishing in them and what they say and so on and so forth. But
and there's a lot of people.
Okay,
there was a lot of people that were saying that this actually sounds more, and I'm talking to Deirdre right now. Hi, Deirdre. She said that it sounds more like an NSA plant throughout the entire chain. Like this is something that they're making up to discredit the Intercept. And that's a completely plausible scenario because, let's face it, this is the NSA. This is the agency that was called, there is no such agency for a very long time.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm not really in the practice of trafficking in conspiracy theories or like ascribing a level of competence to our intelligence community that they don't necessarily deserve. But either way, this was handled
Well,
sloppily by both the leaker herself, Winner, and
yes.
she went against everything that they tell you not to do. She basically did, and the Intercept didn't do any favors by actually taking copies of the hard copies sent to them. That seems like an incredibly sloppy thing.
Yeah, that's where I'm at on it. It seems unusually sloppy, and I mean that you would presume that there would, within the budget there would be an expert that would be able to give advice, and maybe some action was taken without the expert's opinion or something. I don't know.
Well, Sam Biddle is an expert on this type of thing, so I'm very surprised that this happened under his watch. And the only thing I can think of, I hate to throw any one person under the bus, but I honestly, my mind immediately jumped to Ryan Grimm because he's new and he might not necessarily have the same level of competence or same level of familiarity with these steps that the rest of the Intercept staff do.
That's it for me. That's it for this story for me. I don't have anything else to really add about it. I'm interested in seeing more information, again, more hard information based on what what they believe happened with Russia in these particular incidents, and more direct relation, more hard evidence that it was actually Russia doing it.
Yeah.
Because
Essentially, this didn't change the
this.
assessments we've had for months.
Yeah. So let's move into like the meat of this episode, which is dealing with the Paris Climate Agreement. I just wanted to discuss that because it was happening in the news and it was important, and I felt as though it would, people wanted to hear about it. But really, I came here to talk about Trump pulling out of the Paris Accords, and what that actually means, and how much we should actually care. Because this seems to be one of those scenarios where either you think it's the end of the world or you think it was entirely useless. And I don't think that either of those interpretations are incredibly accurate or as accurate or nuanced as they need to be. So, to frame this conversation, maybe to tilt my hand a little bit, I'll ask you all a question, and then we'll go, we will go into the meat of this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how useful do you think the Paris Accords were? Don't answer that question yet. 1 being completely useless, 10 being incredibly useful, and you can useful legally, useful pragmatically, useful symbolically. Go ahead, John. First, go ahead.
I think it was probably about a 3 or a 4. It's useful symbolically only. It doesn't put any ramifications in place for anyone who does not meet the accords. It doesn't do nearly enough in terms of what we have to do to combat climate change. So really, all it is it's making it a nice little piece of paper for everyone to sign and say, hey, we're doing this. And in that way, almost it makes it counterproductive to what we need, which is actual damn reform.
Okay, Rich. Scale 1 to 10. How useful Paris Accords? Go.
Essentially, building off of John's point, although I put it somewhere closer to a -3 to 4, maybe even -5, because of the point that you made at the closing of that, which was how its symbolic nature basically gives us the feeling like we're doing something when we're actually just, not changing nearly enough to change the path that we're on. That's going to be devastating to the communities that are going to be impacted by the climate change overall, with coastal communities and especially island nations, and particularly the developing nations as well. But so I mean, I think, and I think Brandon's going to touch on this point later about Nicaragua and why they weren't signed on and how they got lumped in it. So I won't step on that too much.
No, but, we're going to get into nuance of it. I just want to get to all you guys' initial thoughts. So Adair,
scale of 1 to is Adair back? Has he joined us?
Yeah. Adair, scale of 1 to 10. How useful were the Paris Accords?
I'm going to go with Rich. I'm going to say I'd honestly put them in the negatives. Okay, there it goes. It came back. I'd put them in the negatives just because the simple fact of the matter is they didn't do enough. And the fact of the matter is nothing is enough unless it calls for an immediate and total shutdown of all fossil fuel production, all fossil fuel use the world over, because the only way we're going to actually combat climate change in any real meaning, any real effect right now, is to completely stop using fossil fuels and start working on nothing but renewables. That's the only way that we can get back to a semblance of what our climate was before we decided to go and mess everything up. And this is not just me being some kind of radical, but this is backed by actual data. This is something that a lot of climate scientists have said for years. Only way, and because I say this because we're beyond the point where we could go back to where we were before pre-industrial revolution levels. We can no longer get back to that, but we can do something close. And the only way we can do that is if we immediately, right now, stop using all fossil fuels and go strictly to renewables. So
essentially, if we treat it like the emergency that it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm going to push back a little bit on that because I see it as I'll downgrade it to a 2 because at least you had a national platform where people are agreeing that it was true, and so I just see that being beneficial. Now, do the steps that they said to take in the accord, do they matter? No, it's bullshit. But at least you had everyone saying, "Look, this is true. Climate change is a disaster."
I don't give a damn if you think it's true or not. Like you believing it, climate change doesn't care if you believe if it's real or not.
Oh, I understand that.
Climate change don't give a damn.
Well, I'm gonna answer the question now. I'm with John. I think it's about a 3-ish in terms of how useful it is, and I think at least how useful it is in actually actively fighting climate change. And I think its use is entirely symbolic, right? And I think, but I also agree with that symbolism being a double-edged sword, and this is why I'm sympathetic to. I'm more sympathetic to the idea that it's useless or counterproductive than I am to the idea that it is the end of the world entirely if it's not there. But I don't want to fall into the same trap that has occurred, previously amongst people discussing the Paris agreements and not actually talk about what's in them, or rather what it prescribes. Because we see a lot of people talking about, oh, this is the end of the world. How could Trump do this? Or, it's not that big of a deal. But they seem to not be engaging with the actual 16 pages that exist as they exist. And I'm not going to read all 16 pages to you because that would be ridiculous and not particularly helpful. But I will explain, basically what's in them, right? So what it does is all signatories commit to about a soft target of 2 degree of keeping the increase in temperature, global temperature, lower than 2 degrees, right? As opposed to the better target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. It allows individual nations to decide how much exactly they're willing to do to actually meet that goal. They can decide whether or not that's a reasonable goal. They can decide whether or not they are going to commit resources, establish laws, et cetera, to meet that goal. And furthermore, it doesn't allow poor countries, specifically in the global south, to seek damages from more developed nations for climate disasters that affect them, in order to rebuild or repair. And essentially, it's an accord. It's non-binding. It's completely voluntary. There is no sort of legal ramifications if you violate it. That's why it's not a treaty. No, it's not a treaty. It's an accord. Go ahead.
And the reason why was that was lobbied by America. The U.S. government lobbied, or the Obama administration lobbied to make it that way because they knew they could never get it past the Senate for ratification if it was a treaty.
Oh, yeah, obviously. I mean, that was one of the justifications, that if they did not weaken it to the point of it being almost incredible, not only is the goal not sufficient, that 2 degree, that keeping carbon emissions to a point where they only increase global temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius is not enough, obviously. And it doesn't even establish a binding path to that goal. And that was, again, lobbied by 2009 Obama administration in pursuit of pleasing U.S. corporations and, allied oil states, right? Mm-hmm. There's a good piece about this in, ironically or coincidentally, The Intercept by Naomi Klein. She talks about exactly this, that the Obama administration lobbied to keep this agreement non-binding, which is not surprising because the U.S. sabotaged Copenhagen and sabotaged Kyoto. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a long history of this sort of thing happening. And so me and you, John, are like on one side of this. We think that it actually had some use, right? So describe to me what you think its use was. You said symbolic. I think it's symbolic too.
Because at least you can hold up and say, look, we all agree that this is a problem. And right now we've got half of our goddamn country is saying this is not a problem. It's made up and it's non-believer. And in that way, also, it's a double-edged sword, though, because half the country still thinks Obama was Muslim, and so you've got the same people on the same side of the goddamn issue. And so I honestly think, though, that at least admitting there is a problem is the first step, and that's what this does. Whereas Kyoto and the rest of Copenhagen, which we sabotaged, kind of make it seem like everybody in the United States feels this is not a problem at all.
How about you, Adair? You said it's useless.
I did say it's useless, and here's the reason why. I'm going to kind of push back against what you had to say, John. It's nothing against you. It's simply this. I don't give a shit what half of the people think. I don't care. I don't care if half of the people in this country think the sky is purple. I don't care. Reality doesn't care. Therefore, elected officials should not care. The people in charge, the only thing you should care about is the scientists who have gathered and interpreted the data and told you this is the thing that needs to be done. And the fact of the matter is, a symbolic win is not good enough. It's just not. The fact of the matter is symbolic wins are not going to help us reverse the trend of the climate change that we're facing right now. Symbolic wins are not going to stop the ocean from rising 3 to 4 feet. Symbolic wins are not going to stop islands in the South Pacific, specifically ones around Australia or wherever, getting mined out for as much of the fertilizer compounds as they can, and then sinking into the ocean. A symbolic win's not going to bring back the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah,
I don't give a shit about symbolic wins. What I care about is what's happening in real life right now. And to that extent, the Paris Accords really don't mean anything. They really don't. And the fact that they're just in accords is part of why they don't mean anything. The fact that Trump could just pull out of them is a part of the reason why it doesn't mean anything. And when he said, I was elected to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris, Pittsburgh wants some bread. So if you're elected to represent Pittsburgh,
Pittsburgh didn't vote.
Pittsburgh did vote. I was saying Pittsburgh is a fan of the Paris Climate Accords. So if you're there to represent the bird, do the right thing.
Also makes you wonder, like, does he actually know what the Paris Accords are, right? Like,
Not
because
a chance in hell.
No, there's no way he knows.
They don't really have a lot to do with Paris, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, they do, but then they don't really have a lot to do with Paris. Like, similarly, they don't impose anything. And so, like, this idea of, well, I'm here to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris, like, that's very cute and alliterative, and we know how much I love alliteration, but that has nothing to do with the actual, meat of the Accords. Like, it's not about Paris or pleasing people in Paris. That's just where, they treated Versailles. It's like, it's not really about Versailles. It's regardless.
If you talk
Don't forget, there was a push for
Patriot
Patriot fries at one point in this country. Like, don't
my
underestimate
God,
the pettiness of our vindictiveness towards France, particularly among that political segment. A couple things I just wanted to add real quick was that we got to be careful when we say half the country, because usually we're talking about Republicans, and usually we're talking about voting Republicans, which is about 25% of the country, give or take. Half the country has realized that this political process has nothing to do with them other than punishing them for existing within it, and so they've more than less checked out, and so their opinions, I think, they tend to be more, I think, on the liberal side, but feel that, or to the left, but feel that there's nobody representing them. But I just wanted to touch on those quickly. Go ahead.
Well, I was saying half the country in specific references to polls that say that half the country. So that's not a matter. It doesn't filter down to Republicans or anything else. I'm talking about literal polls. Like, 70% of the country believes in angels. Like that. That's. That's
true. I think when you get to adults, I think climate change and understanding climate change is more. I think it's more widely accepted. I think when you limit it to registered voters or
a Gallup poll has 47% of the country viewing climate change as a actual extreme problem. Like that's the Gallup poll right there.
Right.
Okay. Gallup says that 47% of Americans view climate change as a pressing issue. When you look at other polls and look at the biggest issues they necessarily vote on, climate change doesn't really rank as high. But when asked specifically about climate change, they view it as the rightfully so, as an existential crisis. And so again, I flip back and forth between both John and not all three of you, right? John and then Richard and Dare on the other side. But I think there is, Naomi Klein puts this in her article, the theoretical power present within the Paris Accords to, for moral and popular pressure, right? For people to name and shame countries who are not doing their part, for the populace of certain countries to, cite the Paris agreements and cite the fact that individual statesmen are not living up to the spirit of them, quote unquote, specifically Justin Trudeau.
Yep.
Yeah. And it has a decent-ish benchmark, right? 2 degrees Celsius is not where it needs to be. That's 1.5 degrees at least. But 2 degrees is better than 3 or 4 if it was actually met. But where it falls apart is the fact that there is no enforcement mechanism, which again was something that we lobbied for. We lobbied for there to be no enforcement mechanism within the bill.
Which is important in the context of the impacts of the U.S. drawing out or pulling out of it in general that are being painted.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we can draw out of it is because it's not a treaty. Right. And so there might not be an actual consequences. We've seen people are talking about actually putting consequences in place. But if we're going to talk about the symbolism of it, as it pertains to fighting climate change, then we have to talk about the fact that it does provide this cloak to continue to pollute, but to still pretend as though you are fighting climate change. Just pretend as though you are actually in good faith performing up to the expectations of the agreement.
Right. I mean, that was the whole thing.
As John said, it's important for countries to acknowledge that climate change is man-made, but
I don't think I don't think the rest of the world was as behind us as the Republicans, or as behind on that as the Republicans are in our country.
Yeah.
Nope. Literally, no one else in the world is as behind on climate change as we are.
Yep.
Go ahead, John.
No, that's it. I mean, everybody, including Russia, is further ahead on acceptance of climate change as a reality than we are. And, the Obama administration soft-footed this issue because they knew they were going to face political difficulty at home. And so that was, like I said, they themselves, the Obama administration, lobbied to make sure that this wasn't a treaty that would have to be ratified. They made sure that this wasn't something that would have any stick to it. Just like, I mean, if you remember, part of the reason why the TTIP fell apart was because the Obama administration was lobbying to lessen the environmental regulations that the EU was imposing. So, that is just the history of that administration. We're going to say we're going to do something, and then, hey, turns around, it's not as good as we're saying it is.
Yeah, and I think in some cases, just to the idea that then when the U.S. is pulling out, that weakens the idea that this is going to be enforceable, or that this agreement has more teeth. It's actually kind of to the opposite, in that the U.S. pulling out of the agreement gives the remaining people the opportunity to try and create an enforcement mechanism without the United States opposing it.
Yeah, but even if they did that, here's the issue. Even if they did that, the fact of the matter is the United States, it won't change anything. We're going to outproduce everybody with as much carbon as we can. I mean, you've got a fad with Republicans in their big, ridiculous, unnecessary trucks called coal rolling, where they literally install smokestacks and then modify their truck to burn copious amounts of coal, and not even get anywhere near a decent rate of combustion, just so they can have thick, tarry smoke come out, because let's show those social justice warriors with my big, compensation machine. It doesn't matter. We have to actively change, and we have to outlaw carbon. We have to outlaw natural gas. We have to move to strictly renewables. Otherwise, we're not doing good enough, period.
I agree 100%. I agree. Well, let me finish this. I agree 100%. My entire job for the past 14 years was essentially battling climate change on the water. I mean, that's what I did. When I wasn't deepening a harbor, that was what I did. And so, to watch it happen and to see some of the plans that are actually currently being worked on by the Army Corps of Engineers to combat climate change in New York City, in Boston, in Florida, in all those places, to see what they're trying to do, the amount of money that we're going to sink into the fact of into protecting areas of this country because we're denying that we have a problem is fucking staggering.
Yeah, the preparations they're making aren't to actually prevent climate change; it's to prevent the impacts of climate change, raising tides and impacting larger water bodies.
And it's fucking staggering, trillions and trillions of dollars.
And so, I think that honestly, this Paris Accord allows the whole entire world to kind of get on that footing, and this is going to be an acceptable level of climate change. This is going to be an acceptable level of environmental impact, and we're going to make sure that there's going to be businesses that benefit from all of this, and this is going to be a global accord in managing that. That's what I see when I look at it, and that's why I view it as negatively.
So here's the thing, right? So there is definitely that empty performative gesture that tricks people into thinking that climate change is actually being fought, right? Because we know that Exxon, a month after this came out, a month after this accord was signed, Exxon released a statement that was released a report rather, that assured that fossil fuels would still be meeting 80% of global demand up until 2040, right? So that's actually impossible by the mandate of the accords. For the accords to be met, we would have to be actually, waning off of fossil fuels by the mid-century. We'd have to be way more than what I think 80% on renewables by 2050. So that's just not like that was the amount of contempt that Exxon and other oil companies had for the Paris Accords. And that leads us into whether or not Trump knew what he was doing, right, when it came to doing this. Because it was never an option.
Who's his Secretary of State?
And also whether or not the reaction has been even mildly appropriate, because let's be honest, there was never a chance that Trump was going to actually participate in the Paris Accords in good faith, right? Like that just wasn't an option. We know that in his first week, he signed executive orders on Keystone. He signed executive orders on the Dakota Access Pipeline. He appointed Rex Tillerson to head Secretary of State and Pruitt to head Secretary of EPA. He was already rolling back the Clean Power Plan that was signed under Obama. And so really what it reveals that there were only really two options under the Trump administration. There was stay in, but don't actually participate in reducing carbon emissions, or there was just tear it up, right? You just tear it up. And so the real difference here becomes an optical difference, and thus political fallout, as opposed to any actual difference in carbon emissions, or rather measurable one. But correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean, it's like you said, it's optics. Like you said, I mean, he appointed Rex Tillerson as his Secretary of State.
Yeah.
He appointed the CEO of what was like, he was the CEO of ExxonMobil or something like that, one of the big oil companies. You can't appoint an oil company exec and then say, hey, guess what? I'm going to do so great with climate change. We're going to make the best climate ever. I mean, it's just garbage.
Not only that, but Exxon's being sued. Sued because in the 1970s, they discovered climate change and then lied about it for fucking 40 years.
I mean, it's just performative theater. It is literally nothing more than performative theater. It's been nothing more than performative theater. That's all the Paris Accords have been. And I'm just kind of tired. I'm over symbolic victories. Unless we actually start doing something and actually start affecting change, then it doesn't actually matter. And I don't give a shit if the entire world is if the entire world's population hates you for it, you still need to do it. Because the fact of the matter is, if we don't start doing it, a whole lot of people are going to start dying, and then so will the planet. That's it. Like that's the fact of the matter.
Well, I'm more sensitive to symbolic victories if it's within the realm of something that is not existential, right? Like a symbolic victory in climate change is not really enough. Acknowledgement without change in this particular field is not enough to warrant excitement over this thing. And I think some people are treating it as though it was actually a mandate to get us down to below 2%. 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, but it wasn't that. It was basically an acknowledgement that climate change was man-made and that we could do something to fight about it, and a pledge to it was an abstinence pledge in terms of actual efficacy. Yeah. It was essentially, I said on Twitter, the Paris Accords is an abstinence pledge. It makes people feel good, these people care, but in the end, you're probably still fucked. And I mean, and Trump's rationale for pulling out, again, responsibility to Pittsburgh, not Paris, as though this is going to create meaningful jobs, or rather that the Paris Agreement was actually preventing meaningful jobs from being created when it didn't impose anything. No, like it simply didn't. That's why Tillerson wanted to stay in. Tillerson was one of the people who wanted to stay in because as a member of Exxon, a high level official in Exxon, he knew just how weak it was. And he was like, okay, if we stay in, we can keep rolling back the Clean Power Plan, we can keep polluting, but at least we don't have to deal with the political fallout of not being in this accord. But we know that the renewable job sector has more jobs than coal and oil, and more potential for job growth.
Well, yes. I think that's part of what I see in the Paris Accord as well, is that and to Adair's point about how it's not enough, and that these things are going to happen inevitably anyway. I think a lot of the members of the accord recognize that there's some inevitable climate and global and environmental impacts that are going to happen, and see an opportunity to both shift the energy sector power hegemony across the world, and also to profit off of things like that John was describing with the Corps of Engineers looking at ways to shore up shoreline cities and things like that. There's going to be a lot of private contractor money in developing those kinds of things, and globally. And so having some sort of organized group that orchestrated that means that you can do a lot of things. And U.S. pulling out of that has impacts there as well. And so I think that there's an aspect to that. I can't go into more detail. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to talk about the, in terms of the repercussions of pulling out of the Paris Agreement. I didn't want to reduce it down. I wanted to focus in the beginning, at least, on the actual effect on climate change. What it's supposed to fight, not the effect on trade, because there does appear to be some. You can look at the Paris Agreement as though it's a trade deal, that it agrees to trade in stuff like, solar panels, natural gas. Although natural gas is so bad for the environment, like. Fracking is so bad for the environment.
Yeah.
There's another aspect that I think we should touch on, but continue.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that the whole Paris Accord and all the talk about the green energy movement, just because we've been fighting, particularly in this country, against Republicans who refuse to even see the realities of climate change, we don't really get into the way that the raw materials for green energies are harvested from developing nations. We don't get into the environmental impacts of the waste products or the waste results of the development of these things. So in some cases, particularly in the early stages, especially solar, more so than wind, did cause more environmental damage in the development stage than its coal or carbon alternative. And so moving forward, while we may be creating less of a carbon footprint, we have to look at the toxic chemicals that are produced as a result of green energy as well, I think.
That's not as true as it used to be.
Yeah, exactly.
By a lot.
It's been changing,
that's fair.
But it's also the harvesting of the raw materials. I think that it's most relevant to.
You don't need as much of that.
No,
I think.
I mean, even tidal energy, you could switch to tidal energy, and you'll have a less of a problem with the harvesting aspect of it. I mean,
there's something like 400 times the amount of energy required for the United States in offshore wind, and building offshore platforms aren't that difficult.
No, that's not true.
I think you guys bring up an excellent. I think you guys bring up.
This is according to my professor, who has her PhD in mechanical engineering, and particularly in wind energy. This was something we talked about. This is doable. Wind energy is doable. Wind energy is actually a lot cheaper. It's not as difficult to make offshore platforms.
It's definitely doable.
Quickly, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's important to talk about the negative externalities of green energy so that we pursue the right path rather than just whichever one feels the best or looks the best. But continue the argument. I'm glad that's fair.
Well, I'm just saying, as someone who works in the industry offshore, it is difficult to build them. It's not as difficult as the people are making it out to be. It's still a difficult undertaking. I mean, it's massive construction.
It's never gonna be easy, but it's not. In reality, realistically speaking, it's not that hard. We've moved to a point where it's not this insurmountable task.
Yes,
I know, because my project, my project was researching offshore wind energy and offshore wind energy platforms. I even did the calculus for a lot of it. It's not as difficult to do.
It should be easier than drilling. It should be easier than drilling 1,000 or mile down into the earth and so on and so forth.
Here's actually the thing though. That's not the argument for why people aren't doing it, right? The idea, the arguments for why people don't want to pursue wind and sun energy are usually stupid, right? They're like, well, what happens on days there's no wind? What happens if it's cloudy outside? So you guys want to get into a nuanced conversation about how difficult on a scale of 1 to 10 is it to build, offshore wind turbines. That's a great conversation, but that's not the conversation anyone else is having. It's not that most people. I mean actual Republican elected officials are having. It's the sun goes down at night. What if you need to use your TV? It's that's the level of the discourse everyone else is at, and I think that the negative externalities of producing solar panels, great conversation, not nearly as bad as the negative the downstream externalities of fracking, of burning coal, of any of those other things, right? And so, and speaking of job growth, renewable energy is, if the Democrats gave a shit about climate change, renewable energy is actually a great, job growth in the renewable energy sector is a great thing to run on, because you can reap, you win the Sun Belt, right? You win the Sun, instead of focusing on the Rust Belt, focus on the Sun Belt, focus on these places where renewable energy has a real chance of being a job creating machine, right? And for lack of a better term,
Mhm.
and stop trying to like focus on manufacturing jobs and actually work on a sector that has the ability to grow. And again, it's one of the fastest growing sectors in the world. That being said, though, I did want to touch on the responses to this, right? So we've seen a lot of responses to the pulling out the Paris agreements from all over the place. And I have in my notes, like I said, I took a lot of notes for this. I titled this section "Asshole Responses," and I guess this is
Time
ordered
you
in
got
my
13
least.
minutes left, just FYI, Brandon. So,
I mean, we can take as long as we want,
yeah, fair enough.
but so yeah. So
In the
I want to
first-
start off with my least favorite response. Immediately upon hearing this, people said to themselves, America's pulling out of the Paris Accords. There are only two other countries not in the Paris Accords, Nicaragua and Syria. And so the conversation, or rather like the surface of the conversation became America's leaving, joining these two climate denying countries. Like they're leaving their place as this global leader in science or whatever, and joining the third world, Syria and Nicaragua. And article after article, headline after headline, Syria, Nicaragua, USA, only countries not in Paris Agreement. And just based on that headline alone, and also tweets from people, right? Nomiki Konst tweeted out when she heard this, assuming she knew which countries were being referenced by the map she was looking at, that oil buyers and oil sellers. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Nicaragua and Syria, oil buyers and oil sellers? I guess those are the only two. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile to actually explain why Nicaragua and Syria are not in the Paris Agreement, right? So Nicaragua is not in the Paris Agreement for the reasons why Richard and Adair said. They thought it provided too much cover to polluting nations, developed nations, to pretend as though they were actively fighting climate change, actively keeping it below 2 degrees, while engaging in actions that would make sure it rose by up to 4, which would be devastating for the environment. And so Nicaragua abstained under President Ortega. And right now, they're planning to be 90% renewable by 2020.
Yeah.
They didn't sign on because it was weak, and they felt that it was actively displacing the burden of climate change, the cost of climate change, onto the developing nations, specifically in the Sahel.
And they said that they only produce 0.03% of the global carbon footprint, and they're being touted as being some part of a global south that's actually contributing to it.
Right.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
terrible.
and not only that,
Go ahead.
awful.
I was just saying, it's
But yeah,
terrible,
but this is a position. Yeah, but this is a position that was echoed by climate scientists as well. That there's this whole thing is theater, and it can be counterproductive. Syria is not in it for a more obvious reason, because they were in the middle of a violent civil war at the time. And this is a more complex scenario because they were kind of political pariahs, which didn't stop North Korea, obviously, didn't stop other political pariah nations from signing on. But their reasoning was this civil war that we're in has been largely instigated by Western countries. It's been instigated by Western countries. It's been instigated by climate change. Actually, if you want to look at the drought that climate change caused, that's being an actor in ramping up hostilities and tensions within the country. And when they asked for support for these things, Western nations, the CIA was arming rebels. Western nations refused to actively help with relieving drought. And so I believe a quote out of Damascus said that Damascus burning will produce less carbon emissions than Paris or like the rest of the world. So it's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so reliant, especially in America, because we have this ridiculous car culture, we have this ridiculous idea. And I think a lot of it also, because climate change, like everything else, is intersectional. A lot of it's being driven, too, by this toxic masculinity of, I have to have the biggest car, truck, whatever. I have to roll coal. I need a Hummer. I need this. I need that. That combined with the consumerism that is, inherent to capitalism, it leads to nothing but wanton and rampant destruction.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that
America.
is a simple fact of life.
America's one of America's biggest exports is climate change denial, right? So that is essentially one of America's biggest exports. Exxon, as a company, as John brought up, spent years manufacturing dissent in the field of climate science. They paid millions of dollars, taking their cue from cigarette companies and making sure that there was contradictory science out there. So if people wanted to deny it and just
you have to use quotes. You have to use quotes. When you say science, you have to use quotes. When you say Exxon made science, like that wasn't science what Exxon put out.
Exxon put out propaganda. Yeah. Exxon muddied the water with climate denial propaganda, and it's that
they knew to be false at the time that they were putting it out. It wasn't as if they were operating from a faux sense of ignorance, but they actually knew it was counter to the truth.
Yeah, and it's something that we're still dealing with now. To this day, where people are able to pull up, an article that says, "Oh, climate change is actually happening." So that's just worth noting. And I feel bad because Bernie Sanders was also contributing to this narrative that, well, the United States is joining essentially, for lack of a better word, the third world. Like they're joining Nicaragua and Syria, these backwards ass countries.
Yeah, but his foreign policies always fucking sucked.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's not even his foreign policy. I think a lot of it's just like his whoever runs his Twitter account sucks. Whoever runs has a lot of bad takes, and so for me it just shows how deeply ingrained like this idea of American exceptionalism is into the minds of the people, right?
That 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure journalists are making the Nicaragua, Syria, U.S. all being out for the same reason, faux pas, like as if it's nothing. And I think I heard one or two people make that clarification as to why Nicaragua was out versus. And I don't think I actually heard Syria ever actually explained on any of the coverage I saw. I read it in a few of the articles. Yeah,
the articles usually did it. Right? Mm-hmm. You read the article. It would explain why Syria and Nicaragua are not in it, usually somewhere at the halfway mark. But the headlines in the implied message was America is no longer joining the first world or whatever, sophisticated nations. It's like it's joining these backwards places to deny climate change science. And that was disheartening because the truth was even more frightening, right? The truth was even more disgusting than there are 3 countries in the world that deny climate change is man-made and are pledging to fight it. Because in reality, only America at the state level, at the federal level, is actively denying climate change is man-made in a reasonable way and should be fought in a man-made way. That's your headline. That's your clickbait right there. Yeah. America, literally the only country in the world to deny climate change is man-made. Literally, literally the only country.
And so it begs the question why they chose not to do that instead.
Because I think the idea of American exceptionalism is pervasive, it's ubiquitous. That's this idea that America's pulling out because it's no longer a world leader. It's no longer a world leader. America hasn't been a world leader since China bought us.
And as we covered earlier, the leadership role that we were playing in the as we were talking about earlier, the leadership role that we were playing in that agreement was preventing it from having any teeth and holding anybody accountable. So the idea that we're pulling out again, Go there.
To be perfectly honest, the only thing America leads in is mass shootings.
Yeah, not those.
The only thing America leads in is mass shootings and teen pregnancy.
That's it.
So. I mean, it's funny. That's actually a real shitty thing to do, right? We went into the Paris Accords, made them worse, and then left. That's the hubris of that. We went into the agreement, made them worse, and then just left them. Fuck it. We don't even want to do this anymore.
Yeah, total dick move.
I mean, this is for me. This is just one more thing in the long line of because a lot of these takes are the reason why I pulled out America lacks a sophisticated leader, right? We're no longer a world leader. Trump is not a sophisticated leader. This is more Trump is chaos. Trump is destroying the world narrative, and that's why I'm more sensitive to the people who are saying, "Well, this was useless anyway." Let's not make a mountain out of a molehill, because. Yes, the political ramifications of this are going to be huge, right? We already have people like Corbyn talking about a carbon tax, taxing American goods, people are actually actively talking about sanctions against them. I mean, and a year ago, as Naomi Klein points out, people would, the idea of sanctioning the United States for their pollution would be nonsense, but now it's actually on people's minds.
I think while we talked about the political ramifications, that we could have done whatever the hell we wanted and remained in the accord. Because of how it was structured, that whatever Trump's going to do now that we're out of it, we could have done while remaining a part of it. It's just
that was him just trying to speak to the base.
Yeah, it was a purely political theater. Yeah, go ahead, Adair.
They believed it was something that mattered. They believed it was something that if we just pull out of that, we'll show those leftists, we'll show all those stupid liberals. But I mean, in reality, they could have continued to do everything that they're going to do now. It's
Well,
just
they had already rolled back the Clean Power Plan. They had already started rolling back the Clean Power Plan, and so that's where it comes down to. You have people like Elon Musk coming out going, oh, people like Elon Musk, and other business leaders and business elites coming out and going, hey, like I can't believe Trump is doing this. I know we're going to be on his presidential council. It's like he said fuck you to the environment in day one. Like why is this that? That's why I said that there's political ramifications for this, but those ramifications really show how shallow people were actively engaging with this. Elon Musk had no problem staying in the presidential council when he was rolling back the Clean Power Plan.
Or putting somebody in charge of the EPA who didn't believe in climate change. Like,
no, he believes in climate change. That, like, if you watch the press conference,
you put the dude who sued the EPA like a ridiculous number of times in charge of the EPA. Like, you don't give a shit.
I mean, there were many signs much earlier that clued us into what he was going to do with the environment, I think. Go ahead, Brandon.
I mean, I hate to be that person though. Like but the fact that Rex Tillerson and all these other company heads, Lloyd Blankfield from Goldman Sachs and all these other like oil company heads, still wanted to be in this agreement tells you how bad it actually was.
Yeah,
because
it's like,
I mean, I know why.
I was just gonna say that when I heard that Trump had disagreed with Exxon and Rex Tillerson on this, I was like, okay, well, I'm glad he's disagreeing with them. So I guess Exxon doesn't really run the White House if he's going to disagree with them on this. But at the same time, this is not the thing I would have hoped he would have disagreed on.
Well, a lot of people are disagreeing with this because it actually makes it harder to trade in natural gas. It's like a lot of people, they're disagreeing with this because it makes it harder to trade in frack stuff. It makes fracking more difficult for them. Like it makes fracking less profitable, even though it's just as bad. It's worse for the environment because of all the methane releases. So people like Lloyd Blankfein, who actually invest money in the fracking industry, as far as if I'm remembering that right, like this actually hurts their bottom line, and it has nothing to do with the environment.
Yeah.
Exactly. Tillerson just wants to continue polluting. He wants to continue polluting, and realizes that this is going to get them undue attention from people.
Exactly. That's one of the silver linings for Trump has been his extreme selfishness, greed, and self-centered perspective on everything has helped prevent him from having the types of successes that a lot of the powers that be that we're expecting. So like they were expecting him to get less something passed on healthcare, but more something passed on repatriation of funds from overseas and some sort of tax bill getting passed. And the way that Trump goes about things and how selfish he is about more worried about the meetings that he's setting up in with foreign leaders or phone calls that he's getting from foreign leaders, that is actually preventing him from being able to pass things in Congress. And so that's a silver lining to his narcissistic nature. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we're talking about the foreign leaders or the business elite, right? Like, because Justin Trudeau also came out with very strong words. But for people who know what Justin Trudeau is actually about, it's like he was all in on the Keystone XL.
Just all in on tar sands. About laying down those pipelines. That's all he wants to do.
He is like to the point in which he was not only violating, or rather, his tar sands project was not only violating the spirit of because you can only really violate the spirit of the Paris Agreement, without only violating the spirit of the Paris Agreement, but it was also violating the UN Council on Indigenous Rights. Like it was also violating the rights of indigenous peoples. So I mean, but here's the thing, right? This finger wagging from the business elites, this finger wagging from foreign leaders, is not going to hurt Trump with his base. It's not. No. It's just going to make it's going to make him look more powerful. Like he gave the rest of the world the middle finger. This is honestly this Paris Accord leaving Trump, right? As a descriptor, right? Trump who leaves the Paris Accords is exactly who a lot of people vote for. Like this. I'm going to give a middle finger to the rest of the world, Trump.
Yeah, to everyone. They just refuse to acknowledge or recognize that he's doing it out of his own self-interest and not out of theirs, which is the key component that I think that they're missing out of this equation.
I mean, this raises a larger question because we know who wanted to pull out. Pruitt wanted to pull out and Bannon wanted to pull out. And this raises a larger point about the fact that the kind of ethno-nationalism that Bannon represents, right? That kind of ethno-nationalism is a barrier to climate, actually fighting climate change, which requires global efforts and requires global moderation of use. You can't just fight it by yourself. You have to actually engage with other states.
And I guess to touch on the we were talking about how the Exxon knew for a long time, and that I think America's known for a long time, and a lot of Americans have known that, and the science has been coming out, especially more since 2000, regarding that the world cannot sustain everybody living like Americans. You know, the world can't eat beef like America. The world can't drive like America. The world can't have the big trucks and the SUVs and the all the things that we've come to accustomed to as part of our commercial capitalistic existence in America. The rest of the world can't do that, and making more money and having it all be more profitable won't resolve the problems that are going to occur as a result. And that is something that we haven't really wanted to deal with, despite having the evidence thrown in our face over and over that it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you know what? Let's take a break here and, come back later. Ben has his hour, and we did his hour. We did it pretty all right, I think. And Ben is having a happy birthday.
Yes.
And so we'll take a little break. We'll all take a little break, and we'll come back and we'll finish the episode off the air and post it later. Does that sound good to everybody? Anyone want to say any last words for the live audience?
Just happy birthday to Ben, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and fill in and be on the channel. And that's make sure to check out the SoundCloud for the rest of the show. Adair?
Happy birthday to Ben. It's been a long week, y'all. It's been a long week.
And you're going to want to
wonderfully uplifting words. Uplifting words from Adair. Let's end it there for the time being.
Shut the
All right. So let's check out the sound.